my view of the Akashic records has changed, and so like I've had rooms develop over time. So my Akashic records library is always expanding
Mm.
with more and more rooms and more types of information. And I think that's true with my students too, is that they may start out with a simple vision of a library, and over time, that vision might change and expand according to their soul evolution and what's appropriate for them.
Welcome to the Hemi-Sync podcast. I'm Garrett Stevens, Chairman and President of Hemi-Sync. Our guest today will be Dr. Jennifer Lisa Best. She has a PhD in Indigenous Philosophies and Ethnic Studies from UC Berkeley. She's a psychic, a medium, medical intuitive, energy healer, and Akashic Records reader. She's been influenced by African American hoodoo, Native American sweat lodge, Jamaican revivalism, and Trinidadian Shango and spiritualism. She's also expert in Reiki, pranic healing, spiritual healing, and quantum healing hypnosis technique. She was born with the gifts of clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and mediumship. Dr. Best is also the guest on episode 36 of this program. If you like, you can listen to that first, though it is not necessary. You'll be able to understand this conversation perfectly fine without the benefit of that show. So with that, please welcome Dr. Jennifer Lisa Best. So Jennifer Lisa, welcome back to the show. Fresh off of your boot at the gas pump interview, you're big time now. Thanks for still agreeing to come on this humble show. So for folks that don't know, what are the Akashic Records?
The Akashic Records is an energy library. It's a place that you can go to access information about every soul that's ever incarnated. And people typically go visit the Akashic Records to find out about their own incarnations, their past lives, their karma, their life purpose, any kind of soul contracts they have. Um, and so that's what it is. And we call it a library because it's a compendium of knowledge, but it's not a physical place. It's an energetic place that we go to, not in our physical bodies, but in an altered state.
Gotcha. And so does it appear similarly to most people, or like what are some of the hallmarks of the Akasha?
Well, I would say, different people see it differently. And when I've taught the Akashic Records to students, I will lead them through my vision of what the Akashic Records looks like. But over time, as people do more and more work with the Akashic Records, their Akashic Records, library will change. And also different people will see it differently. And I generally describe it as a library, and so people will tend to envision it as a very majestic library.
Hmm.
Um, but you can see it different ways. I was introduced to it through a meditation, and I had been visiting this giant library my whole life, and so that was my vision of the Akashic Records. But over time, my view of the Akashic Records has changed, and so like I've had rooms develop over time. So my Akashic Records library is always expanding
Hmm.
with more and more rooms and more types of information. And I think that's true with my students too, is that they may start out with a simple vision of a library, and over time, that vision might change and expand according to their soul evolution and what's appropriate for them.
Mm-hmm. And like, is it possible to say, where it is, like where it exists, or?
Well, some people say it's on the causal plane,
Hmm.
and some people say it's on the mental plane. So if you have an understanding of the different planes of existence beyond the physical plane, we have these different realms, right? The astral realms and the uh, mental and causal realms. And if you keep going higher, then you have higher realms, which might be called spiritual or Buddhic. There's different names that different traditions give to them.
Hmm.
But basically, the higher up you go from the physical plane, um, you start to access, more and more information, and information that's less colored by our physical world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like lower astral realms when we first come out of our body, like when we're dreaming or going out of our body for different exercises, we're going to the lower astral realm. That realm is where we're going to see a lot of nightmares, fantasies, desires, and this is where a lot of people spend their time at night in
Hmm.
their dream world. And that world is going to be really have a lot to do with our emotions and what we're kind of processing in our physical world. So whatever we're stressing about or whatever we're thinking about, we might process it on the lower astral realm. But as you move up in higher realms, then you have access to information and to beings that is farther removed from the earth plane.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, the causal plane or the mental plane, some people say mental, some people say causal. So mental plane is a plane where, you know, people talk about thoughts or things. Well, on the mental plane, thoughts are things, you know, instantly.
Mm.
And so on the mental plane, you can think something and then it immediately shows up. And on the causal plane is where you're going to have your really kind of higher level communications with spiritual teachers and spiritual beings that are kind of more evolved.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking to, say, the dead, you might just be talking to them on the upper astral realm. So like your dead relatives, depending on their spiritual evolution, they might be on an astral realm where they're living in their kind of their notion of heaven, or for some people, their notion of purgatory or something.
Mm.
And so you might be visiting them on a lower astral realm. But if you have ancestors that are more highly evolved, then you might be visiting them on the mental or the causal planes. So I see the Akashic records as being on the causal plane.
Mm.
So when I travel to them, I travel up to the causal plane.
Gotcha.
I have read other people discuss them as being on the mental plane.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And so just to kind of suss that out as much as possible for folks. So I guess, you know, to differentiate it from, say, like a medium just kind of sitting with a client, going to the Akasha, you have access to kind of higher level guides or beings, and like the information you're getting is less colored by the earthly influence. Is that sort of fair?
that's exactly right.
Okay, cool. And so you've also got experience, you know, with Bob Monroe and with using Hemi-Sync. Like, how would you differentiate it from, say, just going into like Focus 12 and asking a question?
Well, you know, Garrett, I'm not good at remembering the focus
Oh, okay, all right.
numbers.
So 12 is the state of expanded awareness.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember when I was taking a workshop with you,
Yeah.
I kept going to different places and asking you, what focus is this?
Yeah.
Because I
You're
didn't,
gonna have to retract your certificate.
right?
Yeah.
Bad student. Well,
Yeah.
the problem is I came to it with, you know, experience of a different kind, and then I'm
Uh-huh.
trying to translate it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did, maybe I could talk a little bit about Monroe. I came across Robert Monroe's books a long time ago when I was, I think, in my early 30s,
Mm.
and which is about, you know, more than 20 years ago. And I read all of his books, and I was really fascinated because I had been going out of body my whole life, but I wasn't doing it, you know, by choice. I wasn't like consciously doing it. I
Mm-hmm.
always either had spirit teachers coming and taking me out of my body, or I was just spontaneously going into out of body journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at a point in my life when I wanted to get more control of my gifts. And so I started reading all of Robert Monroe's books about his out of body journeys. And I thought they were really helpful because when you're just having experiences, you don't really have control of what's happening. But when you start to kind of reflect on your experiences and talk about them more, and in this case, read about somebody else who had reflected on their experiences, it was very helpful for me to make more sense of my experiences.
Yeah.
And then I always wanted to do the Gateway, and fortunately I met you in Torrance or Long Beach or somewhere in the south of Los Angeles, and was able to do a Gateway workshop. And so when I think about my experience in the Gateway, it was very similar to what I had done before. But the way I had done it before is I had worked with, you know, I had worked with a regressionist. What do you call that? A hypnotherapist.
Past life regression. Oh, okay. Yeah.
I do that work too, and I can't remember what it's called. I was working with, so I was a natural channel. I was a medium. I was going out of body. And so I started to work with this healer medium who was also a past life regressionist. And we started working together so that I could in a very kind of conscious, directed way, start to talk to all of my guides. Mm. And one of the ways I did that is I would travel out of body to different levels. And I got to speak to different levels of teachers of mine at different lenses. You know, the way that my guides explained it to me was lenses. Mm-hmm. So when I was then able to finally take the Gateway program, it was very similar to that. What I called lenses or layers or levels was what is called focus in the Gateway. Yeah. But I don't exactly remember how it maps out in terms of the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it probably doesn't exactly, and like that's fine. Like they're really just kind of mile markers or placeholders that, you know, folks like to put on locales, as we call them, so states of consciousness that have certain hallmarks to them. And so it's useful so that we can all kind of generally agree on what we're talking about, you know, when we access these locales. That's really all it is.
Yeah, I think focus, did you say focus 12?
12, yeah. So it's like further beyond the physical, expanded awareness.
Focus 12 is the level where I always get to meet Bob. Mm. So when I go to focus 12, you know, when I started listening to the Gateway tapes that you had us listening to, mm-hmm. you know, Bob directs us, right, into these expanded states of awareness. And I think focus 12 is the one. It's a place that I go to on my own, but whenever I do the Gateway, I go there and I meet Bob there. And yeah. it's this focus 12 for me is this level where I'm looking out at this vista, and it's a reminder of kind of the bigger perspective of what's going on, yeah, in my life or on the planet. And so I can see from this vista kind of everything that's happening on the planet.
Right. So let me ask you about that. So you're someone who's naturally gone out of body from a young age, right? I think mostly as you sleep.
Well, both, but awake and asleep. Yeah, I used to have also day visions. Mm-hmm.
And so when we enter these expanded states and we meet a guide or helper, like let's say it's Bob in this case, like what's your take on, you know, the Bob that you're encountering versus, you know, like the physical earth life Bob? Like, is it Bob? Is it the residue of Bob? Like, how do you think of that?
Well, you know, as souls, we're quite complex.
Yeah.
And who we incarnate as this personality is only one small part of our larger soul. Mm-hmm. And so like Jennifer Lisa is just a small part of who I am as a, you know, a higher self or as a oversoul. And so like I call my higher self or my soul Ulyssia. Mm. And then Jennifer is just one little tiny piece of that. And then I have all of these other incarnations as other people, and they're all part of this same soul, Ulyssia. Mm. So when I'm working as a medium, you know, sometimes people are like, well, how are you able to talk to this person when this person is deceased or this person is maybe reincarnated or, you know, aren't they busy somewhere else? How, you know, mm-hmm. And what I've learned over time is that you can access a certain kind of slice of somebody. Yeah. While other aspects of them are living other lives or doing work in other realms. And so when I think about Bob showing up at Focus 12 for me, I think of it as, you know, him kind of making available a very small slice of himself for people like me. Yeah. Just because our work is similar. Yeah. And I think when souls meet who have similar work, like I think you and I are that way, we have kind of a connection, and there's a way in which we're available to each other in other realms. And we might not be available to other people that way, or other people might not be available to us that way, but there are certain souls that will make themselves available to other souls in different realms because we have shared kind of soul paths.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that. That was lovely. So that was a great tangent. Now, getting back to the Akashic a little bit here, how do folks access the Akashic? Can like anybody do it, or are there rules? Are there protocols?
Oh yeah, and I didn't really fully answer that question. Yeah. About how the Akashic is different from these other realms, like Focus 12.
No.
because it's a big question, Garrett.
It is.
It's a very big question.
Yeah.
Um, there are so many ways to travel out of body and go to, there are so many different planes we can go to with different types of information. When I think of the Akashic records, I think of it as a particular place that you can kind of focus your out of body travel on, to say, I'm going to go to this particular place with the intention of getting this particular type of information. And that's kind of the way I think about it. And I do see it as on a certain level. So I do see these levels, like, which is, maybe similar to focus, but it's not the same. I don't know if it's the same, actually. Because I remember when I was taking the course with you, and to be fair to me, I didn't do the whole course, right? Because I was seeing clients during the workshop, and so I was able to access. I think it was like a 3-day workshop, and I only did 2 of the days or something.
Okay.
So I'm not a true graduate.
Yeah.
But what I remember is that the different focus levels that Gateway teaches are very similar to the different levels that I go to for different types of information. And so I think of the Akashic records that way. I go up 13 levels. And for me, the Akashic records is on the 13th floor, or the 13th level.
Okay.
I have different things that I access at different levels. And so when I'm speaking to, say, a dead person, depending on where they are, they might be just right here, right above the earth plane, which is very easy to just move up very slightly. They've basically come down to meet us, and we're meeting them in the middle. Whereas if somebody is dead, but they're unable to travel down to speak to me, then I have to go up. And for those souls, I'm going up maybe a few levels to go look at the kind of portal that goes into the other realm when people die. So like the tunnel of light. I can go up to the tunnel of light, and I can look in, and I can actually see what souls are doing on the other side. So that's a certain level. And then if I want to talk to like my council, which is a group of spirit teachers and spirit siblings, maybe you can call them, that have been with me my whole life, then I have to go higher. And then if I want to go to the Akashic records, it's slightly above where my council is. Above the Akashic records, there are higher realms, where I can get information from higher level beings. And so yeah, the Akashic records is kind of I would say maybe like a focus point.
Yeah. But like, I guess I've been under the impression that like not just anyone can access it. Like you have to like ask permission, like you have to be deemed ready for it, etc.
Yeah, there are some rules and some gatekeeping involved with the Akashic records.
Okay.
That's true of every level. So what I've shown is that each level that you want to travel to, there's a gatekeeper, and you can think of it as a spirit. And there's like a spirit at each level that allows people to come in or doesn't allow people to come in. And so the Akashic records has a gatekeeper, and I always refer to them as a librarian. But people have different names for the gatekeeper of the Akashic records, and basically they decide whether or not you can come in. And they also decide what kinds of information you have access to. So kind of like when you go to the library, and if you want to go to this reference section, or you want to see some, ancient text or something, you have to get permission from the librarian. And you have to have a certain status. Like if you're faculty, you have access to certain things. If you're a researcher, you have access to certain things. If you're a student, you have access to fewer things. Like that with souls, with spirits. When you go to other realms, you have to have certain credentials, spiritual credentials. And so, when I offer Akashic Records meditations or Akashic Records classes, what I'm offering is for people to have a chance to go visit the Akashic Records. And everybody can visit their own Akashic Records. Everyone has the potential, I should say, to be able to. Not everybody will succeed, but everybody has the potential to visit their own Akashic record, because that's always going to be edifying for a person to learn more about their purpose or why, why they came or what maybe their soul, their larger soul path is about. However, the determination of whether the person actually is going to get into the records is not made by me or the person, it's made by the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And then also reading your own records is not the same as reading someone else's records.
Right.
So very few people have access to other people's records. That's especially as you have to have permission for that. You have to have a certain level of evolvement, and you have to have a certain character to do that work, because that could very easily be abused.
Right. Gotcha. And so for you, the gatekeeper is named Metatron, correct?
I use the name Metatron, or sometimes I use the name librarian. Yeah. So,
yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
Metatron is someone that I've had a kind of special connection with for many years. Metatron, who comes to me as a very male energy. So I say he is an archangel associated with the Akashic records, associated with learning, and he actually told me he was associated with medicine as well, which made sense for me as a healer. Associated with education with children. And I started working with Metatron many years ago. And so for me, when I first started going to the records for myself, I was always meeting up with Metatron. And Metatron, the kind of the gatekeeper of the records that allowed me to access some really high level information about my soul.
Gotcha.
When I started leading Akashic Records meditations, I started out referencing Metatron, but I don't always do that anymore because everybody doesn't know who Metatron is, or necessarily believe in angels, or
right.
And also, he's not a well-known angel. Like he's not a part of, say, Christian. He's not in the Bible. So some Christians are like, that's not a Christian.
Right.
Angel.
I had to Google him.
Yeah, he's familiar to Muslims and to Judaic scholars.
Cool.
Some of the older texts.
Yeah. So
I'm familiar with him from Islam or from Judaism. He just showed up, and then I had to look him up, and that's been my experience generally with angels. Is I didn't grow up with angels, but angels have shown up in my life over the last 20 years, and then I have to go look them up and say, who is the person that's showing up in my house?
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, Hemi-Sync is typically shorn of that stuff. So in this exercise, we simply refer to the gatekeeper as the keeper of the records. And so, again, thanks for making that accommodation for us. But I think that's great background for people to kind of have. It's like the behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, and it's okay. I mean, the thing is, when you work with higher realms, you get clear over time that the names that we humans have for things are not that important.
Yeah.
Help us focus. Like for me, for many years, having the image of Metatron in the records helped me to access some high level information. And so that was important for me. And that's often the case with the way that our spirit teachers show up to us. They show up to us according to our own evolvement and according to what we're available and ready for.
Cool. And in terms of determining like what you can access, what role does the aura play, or your own kind of evolution? Like how does that all fit together?
Well, I just recently created a course called All About Auras that's on my website. People can
check it out, folks.
It's a short course.
What's your website again?
It's drbestmedicalintuitive.com.
Okay.
And I recently created that course because I've been teaching a lot of different things for many years. I teach healing, I teach Akashic records, I teach mediumship, I teach medical intuition, I teach psychic development. And one of the things that I always end up having to teach is about the aura. And so learning about the aura is kind of fundamental to so many other things, like developing your healing gifts, developing as a medical intuitive, developing as a psychic. And so I decided, let me just create a short course so people can get that basic foundational understanding of the aura. And, the aura is the energy body that's around us. It's really a series of energy bodies, of subtle bodies. And as a psychic, if you can tune into the energy bodies around people, you can get information about them that you know help them with. And as a healer, you can use the aura to you know, help heal people and to also diagnose or figure out what's wrong with people. And now when we're traveling out of body, we're doing any kind of expanded state awareness, one way to think about it is that we are traveling out of our physical body, and we are traveling through the different layers of our aura to different levels. So there's this correlation between the layers of the energy body or the aura, and then the layers of existence. So you know, in our body we have a physical body, and then we have an etheric body, we have an emotional body, and then there's really a correspondence between that, you know, that state, the etheric body, and you know, the etheric realm, or the emotional body, and the astral realm. The mental body around in our own aura correlates to the mental plane. And so we really are like a little microcosm of the universe, and the aura is a representation of that. The different layers of the aura, it's like our little world, and then the larger world or nature of existence has the same layers. So understanding our own aura, our own energy bodies, helps us to understand existence as well.
Yeah.
And also understanding our energy bodies helps us to kind of visualize ourselves leaving our bodies and traveling into different realms. If we kind of think of it in terms of moving through space and time. Is that the right word? There is no space and time beyond.
Like, is it fair to think of it as like differences in vibrational frequency? So like as you move from like the physical to like the more subtle, and like
So we can
both in
different frequencies,
yeah.
different vibrations, both in our aura and also in existence. And so when we travel out of body, when we travel to the Akashic records, when we go into expanded states, we're often, you know, leaving our physical body behind. Then we're traveling in the different energy bodies. Depending on, so if we're going to the astral realm, we're just going to kind of travel with our astral body, which is one layer of our aura. And if we're going higher, if we want to go to the mental plane, then we're going to leave that astral energy body behind. We're going to travel with our mental body. And so, you know, who writes who? I'm trying to think. There's so many. I like the Theosophist descriptions of these planes and auras. I find they're very helpful. This is from the, you know, the 1800s.
Yeah. Adam Blavatsky and that crew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steiner and
and
Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and Ledbetter. Charles Ledbetter does a good job of explaining the different planes of existence and the energy bodies. Pantanjali, if you look at the you know, the Vedic text, the yoga text, the very early Indian text, which is where the Theosophists got their information. It all came from India. And then the Theosophists kind of reinterpreted it for a Western audience, and then they brought it to the US. So their descriptions I find are really helpful. But then you also have people like, you know, Robert Bruce and Robert Monroe, who do a good job too of explaining some of these different layers of existence and how they relate to our auric bodies.
do you think you generally have to develop the lower bodies before you can develop the finer bodies, or can it go in reverse order? Like, how do you think of that, or like, what have you observed in that regard?
When you say lower, are you talking about the physical body?
Yeah, like closer to the physical, or like, like the etheric, then the astral, then the mental, or, you know, whatever labels you attach to them. Like,
yeah, so a lot of people currently incarnated don't actually have access to those higher bodies. Yogis do, spiritual teachers do, people who have devoted many lifetimes to developing spiritually are going to have access to the higher levels. And then most people are only going to have access to the lower levels, the vibrations that are closer to Earth. So when you say develop it first, I'm trying to make sense of that.
maybe it doesn't make any sense. But like you wouldn't find someone that's got like a highly developed like mental body, for instance, that has issues with like their etheric body. Or
No, actually
like
you would, because
you
so
would,
for
okay.
example, somebody who's got physical problems like
Hmm.
ailments and injuries and disabilities is going to have some issues with their etheric body,
Hmm.
because the etheric is very closely tied to the physical
The
body.
physical. Mm.
So you can have physical problems with your body and still be somebody who's capable of traveling to much higher realms.
Hmm. Makes sense,
And
actually.
in the West, there's probably less understanding of this than in other cultures, but in indigenous cultures throughout the world, a lot of medicine people and healers and spiritual teachers have infirmities or disabilities
Yeah.
or have gone through very serious illnesses.
Uh-huh.
And there's an understanding that that is sometimes the case. Whereas in the West, we're so kind of enamored with our physical bodies that we tend to think a person who is smart or highly evolved or intelligent should also have kind of perfect health and
Mm.
be very fit, and we're
Yeah.
expecting certain kind of perfection in the physical body, and that would correlate to the etheric body.
Mm.
So um so that so so I don't think that's the case.
Hmm.
I think that you can have somebody with a very uh, who's very highly developed, whose physical body and maybe their etheric body, which is the one closest to the physical, does have some
Mm.
issues.
Interesting. Um, so let's talk a bit about spiritual safety. So, I've never personally encountered anything in all my years of exploring expanded states of consciousness where I felt that I legitimately needed to be scared, other than just encountering like my own projections or what turned out to be aspects of myself. And there are many other explorers whom I respect that kind of share this perspective. But at the same time, there are still probably a similar number of others whom I also respect that do have tales of malevolence or damaged auras or attempts to access your body, etc. So, and there are indeed shamanic practices that are specific to this, right? So there seems to be something around that for sure. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, you're special.
Well,
That's part of the answer to that question, why you haven't had those experiences. Robert Monroe had those experiences. In his book, he talked a lot about um, having negative experiences when he traveled, especially through the astral realm.
yeah,
I found that so helpful because I think when you are developing and you have negative experiences, it makes you kind of doubt yourself and doubt
yeah,
your work and wonder, why am I having these negative experiences?
yeah,
The way that Robert Monroe explained it was that we are kind of fear-based people. And
right,
correct me if I'm wrong. I read him so long ago, I could be remembering him incorrectly, but that we're kind of, as humans, we have some fears. And so when we travel through the lower realms, the astral realm, lower astral, we tend to attract some negative, experiences because of our fears. And I do think that's the case. I certainly had a lot of scary experiences as a child,
hmm,
and when I look back on it, I think it had to do with the fact that I had a difficult childhood. I was going through a
right,
lot, and so I think I had a lot of fear and I had a lot of emotional upset. And when you
hmm,
have emotional upset, that's going to color your experiences when you
right,
have a lot of body, when you go to expanded states, because that kind of emotional turmoil is going to affect, um, what you attract on the lower
hmm,
astral. So you're going to have nightmares and scary experiences.
right,
What Monroe said though was that I don't think he talked about emotions. He just talked about this fear. And I did get a similar message from my guides at a certain point about how humans, we have so much fear, and there's something, they actually told me that there's something kind of like in our DNA or in our
Mm-hmm.
programmed into us that makes us very attached to the physical plane
Right.
and also fearful of difference.
Right.
That there's something about us that has these two elements. And these are things we have to overcome when we want to journey to other realms and visit with beings from other places. We have to overcome these two kind of human impulses, one to
Right.
be afraid of difference and one to be afraid of leaving the physical body. And so I think Monroe talked about how we have this natural fear about leaving our physical body because of course we want to stay alive, and that's part of our survival is we have to have this I want to stay alive.
Yeah.
So when people leave their bodies and they're tethered by this cord, there's always this kind of nervousness about I don't want to lose my physical body and lose my life because my life is my access to the human plane, which is this beautiful experience of growth.
Right.
So that fear is something that has to be overcome.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can attract different experiences.
I mean, I've definitely experienced fear. But it had to do with myself. I mean, it had to do with my own beliefs or fears that like I needed to confront. And once I confronted them, the fear it sort of lost its grip, like it dissolved, it thinned out. I could move through it. And, I think Bob's stories were similar. He certainly had fears too. I mean, he was exploring kind of like it was really brand new terrain at a time where it was not at all fashionable to be doing this type of thing. And so, but like I'm talking about like, actual damage, like, spiritual damage, however you think of that.
Well, yeah. That is something I've seen with clients. I have seen people with damaged auras. I've seen people with, rips in their aura. I've seen people with spirit attachment. I've seen people with, charms or what you might call curses, kind of thought forms in their aura. And there's a lot of different reasons for these things, but they are often, tied to fear. They're tied to our physical experience, our relationships on the earth plane. I'm trying to think of a way to summarize it all. It's a lot of different things that are involved. So I'll just give an example then, since we can't cover it all.
Mm-hmm.
Thought forms. This is a really, I think, an easy example to talk about.
Okay.
I see thought forms in people's aura, and a thought form is something that can be put there by yourself or by others. And so a thought form is a creation that's created out of thought that starts to have some actual physical reality to it. And so we think a thought over and over again, and oftentimes people have these negative thoughts in their mind, like I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, right? If someone thinks that enough, it can turn into an actual thought form, which is like a kind of energetic blob.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you meet that person, if you're a clairvoyant, you might actually be able to see a thought form sitting in their aura, like a little black gray cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that thought form. And if you can get them to kind of deprogram themselves and stop thinking that thought over and over again, that thought form will go away.
Mm-hmm.
Now, thought forms can also be in spaces. So the reason that people like to go to churches and temples and mosques is because so many people have been praying in those spaces for so many years that they're filled with these very beautiful thought forms,
Mm-hmm.
Like of love and grace and respect and humility. And so when you enter into certain spaces, you may find yourself feeling really good or feeling very peaceful or feeling your mind kind of shift into a different space. You may feel yourself elevate. You may feel that it's easier to meditate in certain spaces. And that's because those thought forms are in that space. And you can think of thought forms as, as vibrations too. It's like affecting the vibration of a space when certain prayers or affirmations have been repeated over and over again. Well, a thought form is like a prayer, but it's like a negative prayer. It's a prayer that's not for your good.
Yeah.
Like I'm never gonna make it. I'm never gonna make it. I'm never gonna make. Wasn't there a little cartoon character like that? We'll never make it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that can become a thought form in a person's aura, or it
Right.
can become a thought form in a space. So you can think of that as something that's, something that's negative. But I think you're asking more generally about like when you travel to other realms, can you get harmed? Can your aura get damaged when you go into other realms, right? Is that what you're
Yeah.
talking about?
So I mean, just like, on a physical level, like, I mean, clearly we can be harmed. Like on an emotional level, yeah, I mean, we can be harmed. People can say mean things and like it hurts. It probably leaves some sort of, psychic or energetic wounding as well.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, it would make sense that you could be harmed somehow, spiritually on like higher vibratory levels, I guess. But I just haven't encountered it. Just doesn't mean, I mean, doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I just trying to get a better understanding of what it might look like, or how it might happen.
Yeah, I think it does have a lot to do with a person's spiritual evolution. It also has to do with what's going on in their life, what fears they have, what emotional
Hmm.
they haven't done.
Yeah.
That's why I often tell people that if you're going to do psychic work or healing work, you have to always be doing emotional work.
Hmm.
To do, like, one of the things that I teach in my classes is doing a daily emotional inventory, where before you sit down with a client, you always spend some time with yourself, doing an inventory of your emotional states over the last 24 hours. And then you determine whether or not you're really ready to do any type of healing work.
Yeah.
Because if you're upset about something or you're going through a lot, it's not appropriate to be doing any type of psychic or healing work, because that's going to interfere with your ability to help somebody. And it's also going to interfere if you want to go to the Akashic records or do any kind of out of body travel. You don't want to do that either when you're dealing with some strong emotions.
Yeah.
So, because that is what's going to happen. You're going to have some strong emotions, and then you're going to have some scary experiences based on basically your emotional state.
Hmm.
Um, so, I might have told you this scary story I had about experimenting with um, Monroe's techniques when I was
No.
young. Okay, so when I read all his books, I
Yeah.
hadn't taken any gateway workshops yet,
Uh-huh.
but um, I read his books. What is it? Journeys Out of Body. What are the three? There's three books, right?
So there's Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journey.
Yeah, so I read those three,
Yeah.
and I was living in Seattle at the time, and I started to do um, on my own out of body travel while being awake.
Hmm.
And in the past, a lot of my out of body travel had happened at night. Um, and I said, okay, I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to follow what Monroe talked about in his book, and I'm going to do it while I'm awake.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that. I would lay down on my couch, and I had this wonderful view of the Space Needle out my window in
Mm.
Seattle. And I would lay down and do, and kind of go into an altered state and leave my body, and then come back, and I would be fully conscious of it.
Hmm.
I was doing this, and I had a really scary experience. And now keep in mind that Monroe, in his books, he talks a lot about scary experiences.
Yeah.
And I went back and reread them later,
Yeah.
and I was like, wow, he really talked a lot about this.
Yeah, no, he always said that fear was the great limiting factor. But like
Yeah.
when you actually kind of like explore the fear and like get familiar with it, it turns out to like not be what you thought it was. It was just a construct.
So I did have this scary experience where I was in my apartment, and I was laying on the couch looking at the Space Needle, and um and someone came up from behind me, and I thought it was my girlfriend, who was at the
Mm.
time living in Oakland, so she wasn't
Hmm.
actually in Seattle. And I thought it was her, and this person kind of came up behind me and hugged me, and I was like, "What are you doing here?"
Hmm.
And when I tried to turn around to look at her, um, she went running away. And the way my apartment was set up, you could run in a circle in my apartment, the way the rooms were
Oh,
connected. And one of the things I liked about it.
that's
And
cool. It's like a track.
Yeah.
Uh,
So it was like you go from the living room to the hallway to the kitchen to the office back to the living room. It was nice.
yeah.
And so I then jumped out of my body and started chasing her in my, in my spirit body. And as I did and started looking at her, she was kind of glitching like a bad film.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that this was a person, or I shouldn't say I don't know, a being
Mm-hmm.
that was trying to look like my girlfriend, but wasn't able to maintain the image. And so it was like, it kept glitching, kind of blurring, like it looked like her and then it didn't look like her. And then when I looked down, this is the scary part. I mean, that was kind of scary too, that this person was, this was not really my girlfriend, but was trying to pretend to look like her.
Yeah.
And when I looked down, this person had those like backwards legs, like, is it like a deer or
Yeah.
like
Right.
deer legs, where
Yeah.
the knees are like going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
and that freaked me out because
Uh-huh.
it was like, oh my God, it's a shapeshifter,
Uh-huh.
like part human, part animal. It wasn't human at all. It was basically a being that was trying to pretend to be my girlfriend to get my attention. And I chased it all the way around my apartment.
Yeah.
And eventually, I think it left, but it freaked me out so much that I stopped doing the out of body exercises
Yeah.
for quite a while, because I was like, I didn't sign up for this. I don't want to hang out with shapeshifters that are, I don't know what they are.
So were you actually listening to Hemi-Sync as this was happening?
No, I didn't even know about Hemi-Sync
Oh,
yet.
okay. You're just
I
doing the
had just
technique.
read Monroe's books
Okay.
and decided I'm going to start doing this. So
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
followed what he wrote about. I just, I'm
Yeah.
just going to do what he said.
Yeah.
I started to, have these different out of body
Uh-huh.
experiences. And so then I came back into my body after I chased the shapeshifter. And then I was looking at the Space Needle again. And at that point I was like, okay, I don't think I want to do this.
Yeah.
So, but when I look back on that time in my life, it was a very stressful time in my life. I had just gotten my first job as a professor. I was very disappointed. I had worked so hard my whole life to get all these degrees and to, accomplish so much. And I had finally landed this, this tenure track job. And, it's a very competitive process. And so I
Sure.
had this feeling when I finished going through everything I went through that I had arrived, that I'd proven myself. I had done everything that I was supposed to do to establish my credentials and my ability. And then I encountered just an incredible amount of racism, my colleagues and my students. And I was so heartbroken by that. And so I was going through that. And I was also having really serious health issues. I'd had a heart attack that same year. And so I was going through a lot. So it kind of makes sense when I look back on it that I would be having scary experiences because I was emotionally very distraught. And that's just not an appropriate time to be doing this work. And I just didn't know that back then.
Right.
And so when you're able to do this type of work after having done the emotional work, like I did a lot of therapy, I've worked on myself for decades, and I'm now able to be in tune with what my emotional state is at all times, and now I know better than to try to like do out of body travels while I'm in a state of emotional upset.
Right.
It's going to attract negative experiences because your vibration. Can you hear that? There's a really loud gardener outside.
Maybe just a little bit, but not too bad.
I can close.
Oh, there I heard a little bit. Yeah.
The vibration that you're operating at, affects the vibration that you are able to travel into.
Oh yeah.
So,
like attracts like.
Yeah. So it kind of made sense. Also, I found out later that particular apartment had a portal in it. And so I had a lot of issues in that apartment with mischievous beings coming into that things. And I kept doing like house cleansings. My girlfriend, who was also psychic, came and did some work. We were playing Gregorian chants. We burned herbs. We did everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a house cleaner. Like I had, all of my friends would call me when they wanted their house spiritually cleansed. So I knew how to do that. And I could not do it in my own house in Seattle. And it was just after several months, my girlfriend said, "You have to move. We can't fix this. It's beyond us." And so I moved to a different apartment in the same building, and your problem was gone.
Huh.
And so sometimes the problem isn't you, sometimes it's the location.
Yeah.
And that's when I didn't really understand it at the time, but later my guides explained it to me. I asked several years later, why did I have so many issues in that apartment? Because I also was dealing with a lot of dead people in that apartment. And there's this woman who had died in that apartment very tragically, a very traumatic death.
Mm-hmm.
And she came to me, and it was one of the most intense psychic experiences of my life up until that point, because I communicated with her and experienced her death using every possible sense, every clear sense. And so she came to me. I saw her. She was this waitress from the 1940s that had a little waitress outfit on. She was able to show me where she worked, the restaurant. I was able to smell the smell of burning. She had been, I shouldn't say this. She had been the victim of SA, and then her body had been burned. It was a mob. It was very, very traumatic. And I was able to smell it. I was able to feel everything. I was like able to feel her experience. She was speaking to me. I was able to hear all of these words. She gave me all these clues about who did it.
Yeah.
She showed me a picture of the guy that did it. I even tasted. He used to sit in the restaurant and eat sugar packets, and I could taste sugar. So it was
really a psychopath.
Incredible multi-sensory vision that I had of her in that apartment, where I experienced her life and death using every sense available to me. And it was extremely intense and very powerful. And she lived in that apartment. And so that was also part of it, was her death was so traumatic and it was never solved.
She couldn't leave it.
Yeah. And so she was still there.
And so finally she had a resident that could like see her and understand her and communicate with her.
Yeah. So I became obsessed for a while with trying to solve her murder.
Yeah.
And I used to hang out at the Theosophy Library in Seattle. And that's kind of where the psychics hung out in Seattle. And we'd hang out and talk about things. And I remember I used to talk to Greg, who was like the one of the people that worked at the bookstore. And it was a library and a bookstore, which was nice.
Mm-hmm.
And they had talks and stuff. And I remember talking to him at one point. Was it him I was talking to? And or maybe it was another psychic. And I was explaining, hey, I have this situation. And I was asking everybody, do you know a psychic detective? I've got to get someone to solve this case. So I was like finding lists. There was a list of a psychic directory. And I was writing letters to all these psychic detectives, explaining all the details of this case, saying, please help this woman.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I could at that point in my life. I didn't think I was developed enough to solve her case, or I just had the confidence, I guess, in myself. And every time I sent a letter to the psychic detective, it would come back, addressee, and it just, nobody was available.
Yeah.
And so people were like, well, maybe you should solve the cases. But I was trying to do research, but this was like before Google. This was before a lot of information online. You had to go to libraries and stuff. And so finally, this guy says to me, Jennifer, did you say that her clothing indicated that this was from the 1940s? And I said, yeah. And he said, you don't need to solve this case. Her family is they're probably all deceased at this point.
Yeah.
Nobody is trying to figure out what happened. And you don't need to solve this case. And I finally was able to give it up. But of course, a part of me, has always wanted to solve that case. Like, you want justice for her.
Right.
But they were like, that person who did it is dead. The mob that was involved in her death, they're all dead. Like, there's nobody you're going to find, and they're not going to prosecute anybody. It's an old case.
Right. No, I mean, it's really just about you at this point. Like, if you feel like you have closure with it, really.
Yeah. And so spaces can have energy like that in them, which will also affect the types of experiences you have in that space.
So that's like kind of like psychic damage to a space,
Yeah, yeah.
energetic damage to a space.
Well, yeah, you can think of it as damage or, um, yeah. Like I don't think I know enough about, I actually write about, portals in my book.
The ethical psychic. Yeah.
I do have a whole section on portals and possession and soul
Mm-hmm.
paths. So I've had some experience with portals, but I guess I would say I don't know. I kind of have experienced these portals as damage to a space.
Mm-hmm.
I want to also say that I don't know um, what is the purpose of those.
So what's coming up for you? Where can people find you?
Okay, well you can go to my website, which is drvestmedicalintuitive.com. It's just drvestmedicalintuitive.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have social media, Spirit Teacher on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok as the Ethical Psychic. And so I post updates there. I just finished teaching a couple of classes on indigenous medical intuition for the Shift Network. And those are still available as on-demand classes. If you go through my website, you can access those. And then I have a medical intuition course on my site, which is pretty comprehensive overview of how to work as a medical intuitive. And then I just uploaded a new course called All About Auras, and I'm working on some other courses as well. So there's that. I also just launched a merch store on my website. So I've got some, sacred space supplies, like crystal grids and crystals and things that you can use to help set up your space. And then some swag.
Yeah.
And I'm working on another book right now. My second book is coming out in January, and it's called Sovereign Wisdom, and it's a book on Native American philosophy, published by Peter Lang Publishers. And I'm currently working on my third book, which is a book about medical mysticism.
Oh, wow.
So that's what I'm working on now. So I'm working on the book. I'm developing some new courses, and I'm also working on a retreat. So you can also find out about that on my website. I'm going to be having an in-person retreat. Right now, just working on the particulars. I'm probably going to be in California, within the next year.
Cool. Sounds like there's ample material there for future podcasts as well.
Yes, always.
All right. Well, Jennifer, Lisa, thanks so much. It was a pleasure as always. Folks, if you have questions or comments, feel free to leave them. Depending on the platform, we'll try to get back to you. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for now.
Garrett.